Hey, this is John, and before we get into our episode, I just wanted to make mention that if you're watching this or listening to this wherever you're at and you stop short of the end, um, don't do that today. I would encourage you that wherever you get, and Tom has a great story. I love everything that he has to share about his career and some really exciting things that I'll get into in a moment. But you don't want to miss the last 5 to 6 minutes because there's just some special things in there on gratitude and thankfulness. And thanks, Tom, for adding the extra video. All right? All right. On with the show. Hey there. I'm John McDavitt. Welcome to the Breakthrough Creative, where we talk about the business of art and the art of business. I look like I am somewhere in the Arctic with my hat and my coat on. It is getting a little colder here. I am not in the Arctic. I am not waiting to find out who has been corrupted by the thing, like John Carpenter's 1982 film of the same name. I wouldn't want to be there. I'd rather be here with you. But it is appropriate that I'm talking about the thing because my guest today is a special effects buddy, and I don't think he would mind if I called him a geek like I am, a movie and fantasy film geek. Tom Most is my guest today of Mostly Fantasy. Tom is a mold maker, a digital sculptor, rapid prototyper, medical prosthetist, designer, and he has added jewelry to his title, which actually plays a very special role in the last episode of season 1 of the show, The Mandalorian. This is the way. Tom has been a friend of mine for 30 years, and he was actually one of the very first professional gigs I ever had was through him. He hired me to come and make molds, which I'll tell you more about when we revisit that in the interview. But I remember I've done several jobs with Tom over the years, and he is just a delightful guy. Who you see interviewed is Tom Most, and he's really cool. I think he has a painting somewhere of himself that is aging for him because the guy does not age, and I am grateful that he is my friend, and I am thrilled to hand it over to me and Tom in our interview. All right, here we are with my buddy Tom Most of Mostly Fantasy. How you doing, buddy?
Good. How you doing?
I'm doing good, Tom. Thanks for being here.
Yeah.
I like that your studio it doesn't look as messy as mine, but I like that there's stuff going on in it.
That's good. That's because you're only seeing it from like here up.
It's almost like you're standing, if we were to pull back, you'd be standing in the garbage trash compactor from Star Wars.
I am wearing pants, so.
Okay, good. Me too. We need to let everybody know that it's important. But yeah, so Tom, for the audience, of course, you wouldn't know this, but Tom and I have known each other for what seems like forever. Maybe it really seems like forever to Tom, knowing me the way I do. But Tom knew me back when I had thick, long, black, curly hair.
Oh, yeah.
And so it's been a while. And I remember the first time we worked together, Tom, I don't even know how we met. Do you remember?
I think it was through Dave Link.
What? I don't know that I knew Dave then when I was 18.
Or was it, I think it was because I had been on Steve Dahl's.
Oh, maybe it was that, or you had been in a contest for Fangoria magazine.
Oh, yeah. Because I had 2 of my makeups in the, I forget even what the contest was, but yeah, that was like the first thing I was published in.
And so I saw that you were in Elmhurst and you were close.
Yeah.
So I was like, oh, I think I'm gonna reach out to this guy and see. And the next thing I knew, you invited me to come over and work, and it was the first. Yours was like the first studio work I ever did, and Well, it was, you were getting paid to make stuff. So what, we were making copies of elf parts.
Yeah, for like window displays and store displays. Yeah, Christmas elves.
And I remember I'd come in and we'd build a clay wall on one half of the elf arm or leg or body or whatever it was, and then we'd do a casting, and then we'd flip it, and you do the other side. So we're making all these 2-piece molds over silicone parts.
Yeah,
And
masters. Yeah, the old creative presentation masters that they were still using.
yeah, that was a while ago. So and here you are, still sculpting and casting things, more of the digital realm now, at
Yeah.
least as far as sculpting goes. So tell us what you do.
So, I mean, my day job is I still work in the rapid prototyping field. So, you might be making anything from basically a rapid prototyping company doesn't make anything themselves. They're a service bureau for anybody that's willing to pay for it. So you'll have, I mean, I've done car parts for Tesla, medical devices. I can't tell you how many coffee pots and blenders I've done. Toys. Sometimes you'll have an individual inventor, and they'll want a prototype made. And the reason people do prototypes is because we've done I don't know how many cell phones for like consumer electronics shows. So when you do a rapid prototype mold, so a 3D print silicone mold, a urethane casting is the typical workflow, and you can get that done in like a week. Whereas an injection mold for the real thing, the molding alone, might be $150,000 and up, because it's all blocks of steel or aluminum that are CNC'd, and you need big blocks like that because of the pressure involved with injection plastic. Even a small cell phone body, when the plastic is molten, it has to be forced in under maybe 4 or 5 tons of pressure.
So you're like a scientist too. I mean, in the midst of
that's
this.
a nice way to put it. I'm very picky.
Yeah. Well, and that's what makes you good at what you do, because I am like, I'm a concept guy. I draw, I sketch. I love idea. Everybody loves ideas, right? But that's kind of where I've made my market, is like, I can do this. Your work is like you got to sit and think about it and watch what you're doing, and everything's measured and everything's measurable. I mean, it's there's a lot that goes into it.
Yeah, especially making the mold, you have to
Yeah.
think, like, a couple steps ahead.
Yeah.
It's like, wait a minute, if I make the parting line here, like right now I'm doing some work for Shane Folks, digitizing and rescaling some of his dinosaurs.
Wow, cool.
Shane Folks, he's a world-class dinosaur sculptor.
Wow.
I don't know
like miniatures or full size, or
yeah, well, he does both. So he does work for museums,
yeah.
and that are life-size dinosaurs. But he also his company is Cretaceous Creations. You should look him up, because he is one of the best dinosaur sculptors I've ever seen. And I don't know if he does. I don't think he does anything else. I think it's just dinosaurs. I mean, prehistoric megafauna, I should say, because he does some mammals and reptiles.
That's awesome. Prehistoric megafauna.
Yeah,
I love it.
But so I don't think he does sci-fi or movie related stuff, unless it's dinosaur like Jurassic Park. And so I met him at G-Fest. I've known of his work for years, and a common friend introduced us. So I'm kind of educated. So he's all hands-on, traditional sculpt, mold cast, and he was looking for other ways to make the workflow easier. So I'm educating him about 3D scanning, and then you can scale up and down, and with the same sculpt. You don't have to re-sculpt it every time. In fact, when I got into rapid prototyping, it was a company up in Schaumburg, Illinois called Prototype Express that sadly is no longer around. But I came from the toy industry, so I kind of did it reverse. And when I saw a 3D printer in a big 3D Systems SLA 500, and which was the biggest at the time. And I immediately fell in love because I saw the potential. It's like, man, you don't have to resculpt a figure, 1/6 size, 1/4 scale. You can just digitally, scale it up. Even back, that was in 1991, I think.
Yeah.
And I saw the potential, for my own work, much less anybody else's, that, you can do one sculpt and make, dozens of different sizes from it, or turn it into all kinds of different products, which is what I've ended up doing with my own stuff. So I'll do one sculpt, like the Queen Alien skull. So I have her 1/4 scale, which is a little over 3 feet long, 1/6 scale, which is like 18 inches long. And now I have her as a belt buckle, a pendant, a refrigerator magnet, you name it.
So let's do this. Let's go to kind of your career progression. So
Okay.
when I met you, you were molding for a company that made displays for UNESCO at the time. And tell me about your journey.
Well, so my major at U of I was sculpture, because I couldn't find at the time a major in making cool stuff. So sculpture was the closest I could find, and I'm glad.
And what made you want to get into making cool stuff?
Oh, so all my life I've been making things with whatever was at hand.
Yeah.
So when I was in grade school, my brother and I attended the same school my mom taught at. So we would go to her room. This was in Broadview. We'd go just back to her room for lunch. And of course she had, for a, 10, 11-year-old, it was like a treasure trove. She had all the construction paper and, everything in her supply closet. So that was my first medium, was colored construction paper, because it was available and I would make stuff out of that. And then I used to spend all my allowance and everything at Ben Franklin getting colored pipe cleaners. And then I remember the first time I saw The Island of Dr. Moreau with Charles Lawton, the best version. I made all the manimals out of different colored pipe cleaners. It's like, oh, here's the pig man, I'll use pink for him, and here's the leopard man, I'll use yellow and orange for him. And so I progressed with whatever I could find. And then I found clay, and I would make stuff out of clay, but of course that doesn't last. And then so eventually reading Famous Monsters, and and you tell people, oh, this was before the internet, and you had to look stuff up. You had to go digging, libraries. So I found a book at a used bookstore. I don't even remember where it was, on Carl Dame Clark. People probably don't know this guy. He was this incredible mold maker and caster. This was in like the early 1900s. I still got the book. But he did a lot of the displays, and some of them are still there at the the Field Museum in Chicago. Because he has pictures. He did this multi-piece plaster cast off of a dead alligator. It was a specimen. So not only was this thing probably about 30 or 40 pieces as a mold, then he put it back together. And you'd be interested in this, he back painted in the negative the colors of, he still had the specimen there. Now it was preserved, so he had the skin. But he back painted in reverse in this multi-piece plaster negative. I think it was fiberglass back then. Probably an early version of fiberglass. And back painted each part, and then had to reassemble the mold, and then back it up with more fiberglass, and that specimen is still at the museum today. Oh, and then this awesome sculptor also had work at the Field Museum, Malvina Hoffman. Again, late 1800s, early 1900s, and not only was she a remarkable sculptor, but back in the day, I mean, she got them to, which women didn't really do, unfortunately, back then, but she got them to sponsor her going around the world, and she would sculpt likenesses of all the indigenous peoples to have
Wow.
in the old Hall of Man, which I don't think they have anymore at the field. But they would show all the different groups of people, and her sculpts are friggin' amazing, John.
Yeah, I'm looking at her stuff right now. It's gorgeous.
Yeah,
Wow.
I found a book of hers on American Book Exchange, Abe, and it's actually an autographed copy with a postcard she signed to a friend of hers that she.
Wow.
So it was like, wow. So I tried learning from, of course, you look at, Da Vinci, Michelangelo's stuff, but these people that were doing it practically, you know, Dame Clark was doing it for museum exhibits, and same with Melvina Hoffman. So I, started, looking at their stuff. And then, of course, famous monsters. I remember the first time I saw Rick Baker's name mentioned,
Hmm.
and Forey Ackerman gave him the title, Rick Baker, Monster Maker. And then I was following his stuff anytime I could find it. But yeah, so out of college, I went to LA for about a year and a half, and I did a makeup school out there. And fortunately or unfortunately, never hooked up with anybody out there because the work was fantastic, but LA, living in LA, and this was in '84. I had never been outside the Midwest. It was just too foreign for me. So I came back and then found that even in the Midwest, there are people doing that kind of work, but it's display companies. So I started work at I think I mentioned it before, the display company Creative Presentations, and they were doing the same thing, sculpting, molding, and casting. And it was, oh, yeah, perfect.
And what were they making?
So they were doing mostly static and animated displays for companies like Enesco. Oh man, who else were they doing for? They used to do the so Marshall Fields, downtown Chicago, every Christmas used to have window displays. And I remember going, my folks it was a big deal, that you would go down and they had all these, I mean, by today's technology, probably kind of cheesy animated, but it was like Santa's Workshop, animated elves and stuff.
Yeah.
And Field used to have their own art department, and then that went away and they farmed it out, and Creative used to do the window displays. So it was the same molding, sculpting, molding, casting these figures. And then, they actually had their own like costume department. People would then dress the figures, and they were pneumatically animated, which was noisy as hell, but they were, in these little window boxes, so it didn't bother anybody. Yeah. Oh God. Yeah.
Mommy.
Yeah. And yeah, so it was kind of like, it was doing the movie work, but on a way smaller scale. And I still lived in a environment I was used to. So then,
Very cool.
yeah. So then, after Creative, worked for another display company, CR Displays, which I don't think is around any longer. And eventually, then saw an ad. Then I worked at a toy company that I don't know if I should name or not. There were a lot of people that worked there, and a high turnover rate. But then I saw I'll tell you how long ago it was, an ad in the Chicago Trib for molding and casting. And it was a place in Schaumburg, which is like a stone's throw for me. So I was like, it's time to jump this ship and see what's next. And that was Prototype Express. So I went from displays and toys into the then burgeoning, I guess, or young rapid prototyping field. So I kind of went backwards. A lot of people start rapid prototyping and then go into toys or whatever. But I saw, like I said before, the immediate applications for my own stuff. And I think I was the 10th employee, which, eventually grew to, a couple hundred people. Uh,
Wow.
four states, three states, four locations. And yeah, it was an awesome place to work at. And that's where I learned, I had done some silicone molding on my own, but it was trial and error. Again, nobody like you or YouTube or anything to showcase how to do stuff.
Well, and it's expensive trial and error,
Yeah.
right?
Oh
Yeah.
yeah. Well, especially when, you're making, $10 an hour as a kid,
Right.
and silicone is $100 a gallon,
Right.
for a single gallon. And so I would buy like, quart kits and try to make my own vacuum. I knew I had to degas stuff, and my poor mom, and I, make a vacuum chamber out of her old saucepans. And, but that's how I learned. And it's like, okay, this works, this doesn't. And then eventually I could, buy equipment. And then, nowadays I have stuff made, or I can machine stuff, but I'm not a machinist by any means. So I'll draw up the plans and I send it to a machinist and say, because I'm making a window. I have borosilicate glass, for a window for my pressure vacuum pot, but I need a frame to hold it in. So here's the design. You make it, please. And I just pay them the, machine it, stainless steel or whatever, and I bolt it to the pot, and it's good to go.
Very cool. So that was, where would you say you were at in your career at that point?
So I got into the rapid prototyping fields. I would have been 31.
So was this, had you gone back to school for prosthetics yet?
No. So I was at that rapid prototyping service bureau. They folded through no fault of the original owners when they joined another company, because that company had kind of been cooking their books, and it just became a black hole for money. So that dissolved. Then I started my own rapid prototyping service bureau with 3 partners. And if you've ever, I've heard, and it's a very apt description, that starting a business with somebody is like a marriage. You don't know what it's like working with someone until you live with them, so to speak. And so after like 5 years, we decided to part company.
So what went into your decision to actually partner up with people? Because that's something that I know a lot of business people / and artists will encounter at some point, to decide, is this something that it would be beneficial for all of us, or is it something that maybe it's not a decision easily made, I don't believe.
Right. So we had, I at least had seen the writing on the wall at the company was then called Plinetics Express. It was a combination of 2 different companies. And I was on really good terms with all my urethane suppliers and equipment suppliers. And they would keep calling me and saying, hey, we haven't been paid for this order we sent, a month ago. I was like, that's weird. So I kind of had some insight as, that there was money trouble. So we saw what was going on, and then they were, putting tabs on everything. It turned out to be for the auction. It was like, okay. So the 3 other people that I had, and we were all like heads, different department heads. I was molding and casting, one guy was painting, etc. So we kind of saw what was going on. And don't forget that the customers knew nothing about this. So they had orders on the books, and they're ready to go out. So when the axe fell, it was Thanksgiving weekend, 1998, and they locked the doors. So we decided, it's like, well, it's ripe for the picking. All these customers have orders that need to go out. We can do them because we're the guys doing them anyway. And by that point, there were enough other rapid prototyping service bureaus. We didn't have to make the investment to buy a machine. We just outsource, the 3D print, and then take care of the rest ourselves.
So you saw opportunity. There was a definite opportunity there, and it was almost fail safe.
Yeah, and it was so odd. I mean, based on what I've heard and read about other companies, I mean, we started, and then when it was official that they were closed, we called the customer list, and two, I mean, it was like Motorola, Navistar, these big companies, and to a person, that we were dealing with, they begged us to finish the job. So it was so unusual because we started with a built-in client base, which, we didn't have to spend time looking for anybody. They were begging us to finish the job. And because we were the people that had been doing it at the old company, it was the same quality, the same process. The customers, were ecstatic because it was the same thing they had been getting. And I will say, for, Prototype Express put out a good product, because that's where I learned, the vacuum pressure casting and the mold making, and I've, refined it for myself, but that's where I learned the basics. So we took off running, and, never looked back, because it's so weird to start a business like that with customers. And once we got the jobs done, they just kept sending us the work then. It's like, oh, well, you were the guys that used to do it. You were the guys that, saved my butt with this job when the company folded. So I'll keep giving you guys work. So yeah, it was, looking back, I don't think I realized how lucky we were, because nobody starts with, a paying client base.
So the partnership was beneficial for a season, and then
yeah, for like 5 years.
Okay.
Oh, so at the 5-year mark of the business partnership was when 9/11 happened, and kind of foreshadowed events today that things shut down, unprecedented events that nobody had seen before. No flights, businesses just shut down, and there were personnel differences, and I just decided it was best to part company. So that's when I said, okay, what am I going to do with myself now? And that's when I went back to school and became a certified prosthetist.
So you're like 36 at this point when you go to school. And then how long did you go back for?
Well, I had to, because I was a fine art major, and I had to pick up all the liberal arts classes, the hard classes. So I had to go back to school for a couple of years. So I was like 40 when I actually went back to Northwestern.
Okay.
Prosthetics.
Yeah. Northwestern grad. Ooh.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. So you graduate from there, and I mean, what were you doing while you were going through school? How were you supporting yourself?
Well, my buyout from the company,
okay,
I used not only to pay for school, but to live on.
Great. So yeah, you're able to focus on school.
Yeah. So while I was taking up the pickup classes, I worked, and went to school at night, and which I would never have done if I had known how hard it was. Or during the day, and because I had a flexible work schedule, so I could work around it.
Yeah.
But then when I went back to Northwestern, because I was just taking the classes, picking up the classes part-time, because I could only do like one class at a time.
Right.
And I got all the requirements for Northwestern, and when I went to Northwestern, it was full-time. Okay. So then that's when I used the buyout. I paid for school and to live on.
So you graduate, you are an official medical prosthetician. So what were you doing? What were you doing with that?
So I worked, so you have to do, when you do orthotics and prosthetics, you have to do a residency. So I had to do my residency. I did it at one place, and then they were a real small outfit. And then I got picked up by a larger, I think the single largest privately owned O&P, orthotic and prosthetic practice in Illinois, and did my prosthetic residency there, and then took the test and became a certified prosthetist. And I thought, great, because they hired me because of my CAD background, with, such as it is, for doing CAD for orthotics and prosthetics.
So all digital. Yeah.
Yeah. And, again, when I walked in and saw, so the last, at least in my view and the presentations I've done, the last innovation in orthotics and prosthetics was the use of laminating resins in like the 1940s, right? Everything is still done by hand, still done by plaster. And with my background in 3D printing, I thought, why aren't you guys scanning and printing? So for my prosthetic residency project that you have to do, so I investigated using 3D scanning and 3D printing to make what's called a check socket, and then incorporating that check socket into the lamination. So the results, and of course, like a lot of businesses in the medical field, but O&P was complaining about, reimbursements being cut. How can we, make money, doing this, and, blah, blah, blah. And, I served it up to them on a silver platter. Because when you 3D print a socket, and I'm not the first person, I'll readily admit, to investigate 3D printing for prosthetics, but I can't remember the name. It was like a University of Australia. They had looked at it, but that's when 3D printing was brand new, so it was prohibitively expensive, and you only had SLA resins. So I looked at, making an FDM check socket instead of vacuum forming it, letting the patient wear that, and then you incorporate that into the lamination. And because I made my check socket out of ABS plastic is a dream to work with, because you can file it, you can, machine it, you can paint it, and it turns out it loves the laminating resin. So it bonds like a son of a gun. It becomes one thing. So then I cut the socket up, I had it independently tested, and it turns out it's like half the cost, it's half the weight of just a laminated socket, the hybrid socket, and it was like several times as strong as a laminated socket. And I thought, great, here they're going to hail the conquering hero, here I come with, this new way of doing it. I was invited to speak at the World Congress in Orlando. So this is like 2013 now. It was the highest attended presentation in the history, at least at the time, of the Orthotic and Prosthetic World Congress. I mean, the room was packed, and everybody wanted to know about it. I was like, oh, great. And then I got invited to speak at a 3D printing show in London, same year, for their medical division. Again, I thought, great, they're, back home, the company's going to love it. I get back, and the first thing I swear to God, John, the first thing they asked me is, how many times did you mention the company? And it's like, look, here's the keys to the kingdom. Here's a way to, get back your reimbursements, to still make money, and more importantly, provide a better device for the patient that's, stronger, lighter. From your perspective, it's cheaper. You can get an autonomous workforce with the machines printing these things at night. I set up everything for them, but it was like I was going to be burned at the stake. I was speaking, black magic, because at least then, nowadays, I don't know, because I haven't been in the field in a while. Nobody knew anything about 3D printing in that field, which is why I had such a good response to it. Because they were like, oh, yeah, we've heard about 3D printing. Tell us more. And, to this day, I still get like the O&P Edge magazine, and like every couple months, there'll be an article, is 3D printing viable for the field? Really?
I already answered that.
Yeah. Look at the archives from 2013. And I put my paper online, my presentation with the test results. And it's like, dude, it's free. Look it up,
Well, it's a good lesson, right? In you can't always change the market with excellence, because it's money driven, or it's pride driven, or there's just a whole bunch of things that go into it. I shouldn't say this, it's a generalization, but you run into people where the people in power, it needs to be their idea. And
Exactly.
so you got to manage that, and every industry is different, but personality types tend to be in every industry. So
Yeah, unfortunately.
yeah. So how long did you do that? How long were you doing
So I did
the
that was 6 years,
okay.
and then I just got fed up with, in my view, the incompetence
Yeah.
of the pardon me, and the lack of foresight.
Mm-hmm.
So then I went back into rapid prototyping.
Yeah.
And have been doing that ever since.
Okay. So rapid prototyping, and you've been working for companies as well as for yourself?
Yeah, so I still have all throughout, all this long spiel. I've always had my own freelance work.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about the freelance work that you do, because I know that you make molds for people. You've made molds for some people I've worked with, but then I know that you have like your own product line.
Yeah. So basically, if something interests me and I can't find it, I'll make it. So one of the first things I did for myself was a Dunkleosteus, the old armored, I think Devonian. Somebody will probably correct me. It was like the apex predator of its day. And
Okay.
I think the field has one. They had this incredible head of armor plate, bone, and their jaws were like metal shears. It's just this awesome. Nature's the best designer,
Yeah.
which is not an original line. Somebody else has said it, but it's true. This thing was just so cool looking. And I couldn't find a model of anyone, anywhere. So I made my own. And I was learning Zbrush at the time, so I could kind of combine both. The things I wanted to make, so it was an impetus to learn Zbrush. And the reason I actually got into Zbrush was because of Rick Baker.
So tell the audience what ZBrush is.
Because Zbrush, if you're unaware, is from a company called Pixelogic, and it is a digital sculpting program. And I mean, Rick Baker uses it, Hollywood uses it, you name it. Industrial Light and Magic, and it's not very intuitive. Because I actually owned it for about 3 years before I actually really did stuff with it, and that's because I took an online class with it through Nomon Studios, and I had an awesome Madeline Scott Spencer, one of the best teachers I've ever had, and of course it was all online, and it was interesting because she was working at Weta Studios, so the class was 3 hours a night, Saturday nights, 3 hours, in a row for 10 weeks, I think it was. So it was 10 o'clock p.m. my time, Saturday, or 7 to 10, sorry. But it was Sunday morning for her in Australia, or New Zealand. Sorry, Weta Studios. And it just worked out great. She was so easy to work with, and I was worried how an online class is going to go. She was such a good instructor. She answered every question, and that's where I really learned Zbrush, and have been using it, almost daily since.
Do you mind if I ask you how much you invested into the course?
It was, at the time I was able to get half reimbursement from the rapid prototyping company had a program for young education. So I think the class was $1,600.
Okay, so you paid $800.
Yeah, or $1,200, and of course this was 5 years ago, so I don't know what it is now. But even if I had to pay the whole thing, I'd do it in a heartbeat.
Well, it's interesting. There's a thread running through your story about investing back into your education. You started going to school, then you're kind of learning on the job with people, but then making your own stuff, and it's always education, and I think that that's really important for people to know, that we need to keep learning, and it's important to invest resources into your learning, not just your time, but the teachers that you go after, and the cost of that. It costs something, but it's valuable.
Yeah. And I would recommend, if anybody wants to get into digital sculpting, the way I got into it, I saw Zbrush and I was like, well, is there anything free I can try to see if I even like it, before I invest in it? And a guy in Sweden created a program called Sculptress. And it's a digital sculpting program. It's still available. He put it online for free and said, have fun. The downside is it's never been upgraded. It's like one version and that's it. But Pixelogic, the ZBrush's mothership, saw the worth of it. So they bought them out and they kept it free. Because I always tell people, I think, they see it as the, what do you call it, like the gateway drug into ZBrush. But, I mean, people, and my Queen Alien, I did in Sculptress. The Elephant Man skull I did was in Sculptress. So you can do some really, detailed, and it's a lot more intuitive than ZBrush is. ZBrush has a lot of bells and whistles, which are all valuable, but Sculptress is kind of more bare bones. There's like, 9 brushes you can use. And if you hit the Alt key, that does the opposite function. So there's maybe, not quite 18 because some don't have an opposite function, but it's really easy to use.
So it's a little bit of a switch to move over.
Yeah.
Once Sculptress to move into.
So that was my deciding factor. And I love Sculptress.
Yeah.
And the other thing, the other reason I went digital is because I was, working in Wisconsin. I still lived in Illinois, so I had an apartment up there. I would come back on weekends. I didn't want to carry a 50-pound clay sculpt back and forth. So I could do the digital sculpt and just email it to myself and, work on it at home and, finish it. So Sculptress and the ease of convenience was kind of why I decided to, get ZBrush and learn it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think around 2000 is when I got my first computer and I started to venture into digital with Illustrator and Photoshop, and I've never looked back. It's been wonderful. I mean, and I find myself now, I'll go back and I'll paint, and I put the airbrush down for years, but if I need it physically, if I got to do something with the airbrush, I can pick it back up again.
And I'm sure, especially in your case, knowing how to use an airbrush, because you're one of the best airbrush artists I've ever seen.
Oh, well, thank you.
You did that one alien. It was an alien, the creature, the xenomorph, freehand, the full body profile on a T-shirt. I was blown away. But I'll bet you any money that hand skill, knowledge using it, helps you in digital painting.
I agree with that. I totally agree with that. I think it helps. It's helped me. It helps me that I have a sculpting background too.
Yes.
To design for sculptors, whether it just be traditional or digital, I think that the learning of something always benefits you in another area. And I think what you're getting at is that if you don't have the traditional skills, you may be at a little bit of a deficit.
Yeah, because I was telling a friend of mine, even when I'm digitally sculpting, I can see molding problems. Because you can make mistakes digitally that are not physically possible in the real world. You can invert the sculpt, so
right.
You can have things folded over themselves, which it's like an MC Escher, painting translated into the 3D world, the physical world. You can't happen. But you can make those mistakes, digitally. And having the traditional background, it's like, oh, I can't do that. Or that means a 3-part mold instead of a 2-part mold, or, whatever. So I will always, hopefully always see those problems. So I'll just make like a tusk of a creature. So I'll make that as a separate piece and just do a male-female fit. So it'll be 2 separate physical parts that I print, mold, and cast, and then just glue it in.
It's absolutely fascinating. And then you can make sure digitally that the fit is perfect.
Yeah, you do a Boolean subtraction and, boom,
Yeah.
oh God, I love that.
Do you follow Freight Train Mold Maker on Instagram by any chance?
No, that's
So Freight Train Mold Maker, I mentioned him to you earlier, a guy named Rob, and he's a mold maker for special effects makeup. And he did a lot of work for Rick Baker. He does a lot of work in the industry now, but he'll break down, and much of it is physical that he shows. It's all physical, what he shows. And it's like all the parts and the puzzle pieces. And I mean, you'll love it. It's fascinating.
I'll have to look that one up.
Yeah. He's a good guy. So very cool. So tell me more about your stuff then. Like you talked about the Queen Alien and you've actually, I know you've got a pretty cool story around a very particular iconic image that made a big splash this past year.
So I heard about, I try to visit shows before I try to display there. So you can kind of cherry pick, well, this show worked, this show didn't. So about 2010, I think, I heard about Monsterpalooza. So I went out to LA. That was still at the old Burbank Marriott. And I saw the show and I fell in love. And I was like, okay, I've got a display here. So, I looked around and I saw stuff that people were selling, anything from, full-size animatronics for haunted houses to, their own jewelry stuff. And I was like, okay. And that's when I realized, like I mentioned before, digitally, once you have a file, you can turn it into all different kinds of things. So I had done my quarter scale queen. And I was like, well, what else can I make out of this? So then I decided, oh, well, I'll do some jewelry. So I, scaled her down. I did a 300 mask, V for Vendetta, the Guy Fawkes mask, the Queen Alien is my own, design. And I've been a big, huge Star Wars fan since it came out. The movie changed my life in '77. And, Boba Fett had the Mandalorian kind of emblem, the mythosaur, on his shoulder. But his has a big lightning crack in the skull. So, it's canon, so people want that. And, it's like, I've never seen a symmetrical or, realistic skull of the creature. So, well, I'm going to do my own because I can't find one. And, it's since, nowadays you can find it all over the place. So I made my own as like a standalone skull. And then I said, I'll scale it down for a pendant. So, and it was a pretty good seller, but, people see it online or, at a show and, low numbers. So I'm at Monsterpalooza and it's Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Friday is a shorter show because it's opening night. So it's like 6 to 11, I think. So the 2018 show, I just finished setting up Friday and I'm getting ready to sit down. I kind of see this shadow pass in front of my table. I look up, it's Jon Favreau. Because he's, doing the show before it gets busy, so, he can get in, get out, not get bothered. And I knew right away who it was. And it's like, wow, thank you for Iron Man and, Elf. And he was a really cool guy. He's a big guy. He looks like, like a shot putter. I mean, he's as wide as he is tall, just about, but such a cool guy. And he says, oh, he sees the, I have a mythosaur refrigerator magnet, the pendant, the skull. And he says, oh, what other mythosaur stuff do you have? Now, keep in mind, this is before I knew anything about the Mandalorian. I think before anybody did. Maybe, some people did, but I didn't. So he looks at that, I have it in pewter and bronze. And he goes, I like the weight. And he almost buys me out of the show. I'm like, wow, thank you, Mr. Favreau. He's like, keep the change. And, then he's out of it. I'm like, wow, what a great start to the show. A week later, I get an online order for like another, 30, the same amount he bought. And I see it's going to Pasadena. And I email a person and say, oh, it's too bad I was there last week. You could have saved the shipping because they wanted it FedEx overnight. And like, that costs more than the pendants did. And like, don't worry about it. Well, it turns out in emailing, it was his production assistant. And she's the one that told me, it's going to be used in the show we're creating called The Mandalorian. She said, but you can't say anything on social media until it airs. And I'm like, you got it. Because I had it on my, my website and, Etsy account. People were sending me screen grabs because I hadn't seen the last episode yet. And it turned out that the Mandalorian, Pedro Pascal's character, is wearing the pendant, rips it off, holds it in his hand, like, center screen. Where's my screen? Like that, centered.
Yeah.
Gives it to Baby Yoda, and Baby Yoda told me, I mean, you cannot buy that kind of advertising. And so, my phone exploded. Within one day, I ran out of, the stock I had, because I only had 75 of them in stock. And, I have never seen anything like it, John, personally. And I had to call the foundry. And, of course, it was like New Year's weekend, New Year's week, that everybody was on vacation. The foundry's on vacation. It's like, you got to be kidding me. Luckily, they read their emails, and I said, yeah, give me another 1,000. Please, as ASAP, send them as soon as you got them. They were great to work with. They sent them. I just did, 50 a day. And, it was awesome. Now, I have to say, so I have to make the important legal distinction is that I did not make this for the show, for The Mandalorian or for Jon Favreau or ILM or Lucasfilm. I made it for myself, and they bought it and were kind enough to use it in the show. Right? I've heard that's an important legal distinction. So nobody requested this being made. I made it because it was a fun sculpt to do in Zbrush, and I wanted a symmetrical skull without a crack in it, like Boba Fett has on his shoulder. And it had been extremely fortunate that it was used, in the show. And they have allowed me to continue selling it, which I will also be eternally grateful for. So the only difference is that, so Favreau bought all the pewter ones I had. He didn't care for the bronze color, I guess, because I have like white, yellow, and red bronze. Because the ones he bought, I only had the antique original pewter. So people were asking me, oh, how can I get it to look like that? Is it okay to polish? And that was kind of another aha moment. It was like, oh, I can get them plated and look like that and offer a variety. And the foundry is great to work with. They're, oh yeah, we can plate, we can nickel plate, gold plate, silver plate, and so they sent me samples. So I offered the plated version, which looks, it's all chrome-y, shiny. And so that's, another version. So people can buy the actual original, which was the one on the show, even though it doesn't look like it, or they can buy the plated version. And then the high-end ones I have are the yellow, red, and white bronzes.
That's awesome. Boy, you talk about being in the right place at the right time, huh?
Oh, God, yeah. I mean, if I had to take a bathroom break or something, who knows what would have happened. But, yeah, thank you, Jon Favreau. I love you. It changed my life.
Now,
So,
how did obviously it's Lucasfilm, it's Disney, licensing. How did that all work out?
Well, again, just kind of fell in my favor. So what I found out is that the same object, if used for a different purpose, has a different license. So if you take the Mythosaur skull and hang it on the wall, well, that's wall art. So that's a license that a guy has in New York. Even if it's the same size, same material. So if it's worn as jewelry, that falls under the prop license, which is another guy in LA. So it happened that we had a common friend who was doing work for ILM, and they were trying to find out who was making the pendant. And they were checking all the prop houses. They had heard Favreau had bought it at a show, and they thought it was a prop house or something. And my friend happened to be at the meeting, and he said, "Oh, I know who makes it. It's a friend of mine in Berkeley, Illinois." So he put me in touch with the license holder, who was also very cool. Thank you.
Well, again, you've got a buddy sitting in at ILM who can answer that. What are the chances, right?
Yeah, talk about chess pieces being at the right squares on the board.
And if I can add just one more thing, insert it. I was speaking with Alec Gillis recently, but we talked about luck, but then being ready for the luck that comes along, or maybe a better term is opportunity. The old saying is luck favors the prepared, or opportunity is for the people who are prepared. So you were prepared for it.
Yeah, and I mentioned to my sister-in-law, and I said, I'm just damn lucky I was there. And she goes, "No, you've been doing the show for 8 years. You had them made. It wasn't like a prototype that you weren't ready to sell." And I was like, "Well, thank you, Jane." You're right. I had the stuff. I had been making it and selling it, but yeah, I was prepared with stock but yeah, there is that factor of the right place at the right time. And so my common friend put me in touch with the license holder of the he has the jewelry license, and luckily he is also a very cool guy. And he goes, "Look, nobody cares if you still make them and sell them on your own, but we want to do the official license version." So it worked out as better than I could have hoped for or planned.
Yeah, that's amazing. How do you figure out your pricing for your items? Because there's cost, right? And then there's value and all that.
Exactly. So, I look around at, both Etsy and Amazon and eBay, you name it, for something that's similar, because going into this, actually selling my stuff, it was like, and I found out I was initially selling stuff way cheap, I was still making money off of it, but it was the perceived value, like you said. So I look and see, something, the same material, about the same size. And I say, okay, that gives me a base. And then I get pricing from the foundry. I know how many hours I've put into the sculpt, the creation of the digital file. I know what the price of the 3D print is going to be. And then what I do is I never send my original 3D print to the foundry, because it's probably going to be destroyed, right? So I don't want to have to backtrack. And so when I get the 3D print, I pattern finish it and make it look nice, get rid of the build lines, mold and cast it in urethane so I can send copies out. Because that was another learning curve, finding a good foundry. So I had I did a Sons of the Harpy pendant from Game of Thrones, and it's got like a wicker pattern on the face and these two little horns. And I sent it to one foundry, and I found out they did a one-piece mold, and they cut it open. They cut it open right across the face, so it's like he's got a dueling scar. And I'm like, you got to be kidding me! Even if I didn't have a background in molding and casting, that's unacceptable.
Right. And
knowing that, you can make a 2-part mold or cut it more carefully.
Yeah.
So, that was a whole, it took me about 1.5 years to find a good foundry, 2 good foundries, because one guy does my bronze and the other guy does my pewter. And, so to get back to your question, so I take all those factors and then kind of look at a price point that I think would be viable.
Excellent.
And is both fair to me and, a potential customer. Because, let's face it, I'm making these things to sell. I make them because I like to make them. If I can sell them, that's bonus. And I also look at it, from the other side of the table at shows like Monsterpalooza. It's like, what would I be willing to pay for something like that? And, I'm prejudiced. I think my sculpts are cool, but I see other stuff at the show. It's like, wow, that's really cool. If
Yeah.
that was, what would I be willing to pay for that?
Yeah.
So
That's
that
awesome.
kind of a bouillabaisse of information, but
I like that you pulled out the word bouillabaisse. Love it. Tell me, what is your income stream look like? How broad is it? Like, what are the things you do that you earn from?
oh, so the other thing that the Mythosaur pendant has kind of opened up for me has been doing custom jewelry for people now.
Okay.
So
Like
people,
fantasy or whatever.
whatever. So people will say, oh, I customized. There's one woman. She asked me to customize, instead of a pendant, she wanted it as a double clasp for like a cloak with a chain between the skulls. I'm like, oh yeah, that's easy to do. I charged her, my time for it. She was more than willing to pay for it. Loved it. I got it out to her in like 2 days. And she said, "Oh, by the way, I'm in this group, and we want to have our own jewelry, realized in 3D. Can you do it?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "I need something to work from, like a picture or a drawing or whatever." So luckily they had line drawings of it, and she emailed me those. I said, "Well, how big do you want it? From top to bottom of the drawing, as an actual pendant. How big do you want it? It's an ankh." And she said, "This big." And I said, "Okay, let me get back to you." I figured out my time for sculpting it in Zbrush, and then I could get pricing on it from the foundry. And I now have my own little 3D printer, which is perfect for jewelry. Anything bigger than that, I still farm out. But and say, "Well, how many pieces do you want?" And I said, "Well, here's the deal. Here's the base price for making it. If you want me to oversee the production, it'll be this much more. Or, to be fair to you, once I get paid, I'll send you the master, or I can send the master to the foundry I use and put you guys in contact with each other. So, you're not paying me to do something you can do yourself. And, frankly, that's less hassle for me." And she said, "Oh, that'd be perfect. Because I don't really want to oversee, somebody else's production. I'm, busy enough with my own. I mean, I'll do it if they want to pay me, but." So I just actually make it as a 3D product, and then get paid for that, and then put them into, and then it keeps my foundry and busy, and not that they're ever slow, I think, but it's, more for them. So my source is protected because they're getting more work.
Right.
So it's a win-win, for everybody.
Right.
It's less money for her. I'm still getting paid for what I did, and I'm making sure my foundry gets work so they can do my stuff. So.
And you're doing work that you enjoy to do on top of
Yeah,
it.
because it's, I don't know if I would have ever made an ankh of my own to sell.
Yeah.
But they had a really cool design, and it's like, hey, perfect. I'll do yours, and then I'll send you the files, once I'm paid, and then I delete it. But it might, give me ideas for something of my own to do. But you get a really bad reputation really fast. If you start recasting, so to speak, or selling other people's stuff, I don't want to do that. I want to make their stuff, and then I'm done with it.
Right. Right. That's cool. So yeah, so you've had quite a journey. I mean, you have worked for companies, a variety of different companies, with your mold making and reproduction skills. You have created your own line of art that you sell, and then you're available for people to hire who may want to have something created. Have I missed anything? I guess apart from the medical work that you did.
Yeah, that's kind of a weird offshoot, but
Yeah.
But it's related to the other stuff because of the 3D printing. But
Yeah.
It's been, and like you said, continuing education. I've always cherry picked the things that were useful to me from wherever I've been. It's like, one of the first rapid prototyping companies I worked for, they used to do gravity feed molds and castings, and then you get the air bubbles and the other problems I mentioned before. And then another one, when I saw vacuum casting, it was like, wow, it, again, like seeing 3D printing for the first time and realizing the possibilities. I saw vacuum casting and I just adopted it.
Yeah.
Now, granted, my molds are a little bit different because I've done things a little bit differently than they, but the basic idea I learned from, working at a place, and then, adopted it. I hung on, tooth and nail to that technology. It's like, you cannot beat this.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, cool. So, hey, I'll tell you what, as we wrap up, do you have any words of wisdom for the audience, for people who want to be creative entrepreneurs, breakthrough creatives, doing their own thing with the craft that they love to create with?
Just like to reiterate what you said, keep learning. That's so important, whether it's, another sculpting medium, Sculpey versus Fimo or oil-based clay or sulfur-free clay. Try different urethanes. Always keep learning about this stuff, and get into zones that you're not comfortable in. Because you never know what you might learn from that.
Can you give me an example of an uncomfortable zone?
I should have had something. But I mean, like let's say jewelry. I mean, I never would have thought of doing jewelry. I was always more, the figurative, the quarter scale or 1/6 scale figures. That was what I was doing mostly, originally. And then I got into digital sculpting and realizing the variety of things you can do with a 3D file. Like I said before, scale it up or down. That kind of, I never even thought of doing jewelry. Not that it was just like an unknown, not so much an uncomfortable area.
Yeah.
But it opened up, all different kinds of vistas that, I can do these other things with the same file. Or like, digital sculpting. Some people, like a common friend of ours, who I will not mention, he's an awesome physical sculptor. To this day, he has not, as far as I know, ventured into 3D sculpting. I don't know why. Because I think he's uncomfortable with the technology. I mean, I certainly was. If I showed you some of my early sculptural stuff, oh my God, they were just mistake heaped upon mistake. But, I just, plowed through it. And it's like, I'm going to learn this technique.
Yeah, I totally agree. I hated Photoshop when I first got into Photoshop.
Yeah,
it was so uncomfortable. And I thought, why did I buy this computer? I've got a $3,000 paperweight. I can't figure it out. And then I just started taking on jobs that forced me to learn.
Yep.
And that was the best way to do it. So
it shows, people say, what do you sculpt with? And well, Zbrush. And they go, oh, what tablet do you use? I use a mouse. And people are dumbfounded. Because that's how I learned.
Yeah.
That they didn't have Wacom tablets, at least I think, when I started.
Yeah.
And I eventually got one, but I haven't, gotten around to using it. I'm so used to a mouse. That's kind of an uncomfortable situation. It's like, I want to start forcing myself to use the Wacom.
Yeah.
Because I'm sure I can refine, even the digital sculpts with the brushes. Because, with a mouse, you're just making your tool size bigger or smaller. Whereas with the you do the same thing, but it's a font or a nib, tip on the pen. So
it'll be an awkward transition, but you'll love the result. I'm pretty sure. Yeah,
I'm sure, because it's it's another learning curve.
Yeah.
But
awesome. Thanks, Tom. Tom, if people want to find you, where can they go?
So they can go to Mostly Fantasy. mostlyfantasy.com, and because my last name is Most. So years ago, somebody asked me what kind of work do you do? Is it? I said, well, I do some horror, some sci-fi, but mostly fantasy.
Ding, ding, ding.
Yeah. So I was like, well, I got the name, I'm going to use it. And there's an email through the website. I'm updating it with newer products, but they can also go to my Etsy site, because Etsy is a lot easier for me to change the shop.
Yeah.
And I had my web lady do the shop, the website.
Yeah.
But Etsy, mostly fantasy, all one word. I have more of the current varieties of things.
Excellent. So yeah, so if you want to reach out to Tom, go to his website. If you want to buy something from him, you can go to Etsy as well. And I want to thank you for being my guest and for being a good friend all these years.
Same here.
It's been a really good experience for me to know you, Tom. So have a good one. Cheers, buddy.
You too. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much, Tom, for being my guest today. It was fun to revisit just old adventures with you and to hear what you've been up to over the years, and especially with just this really exciting happening in your life and your career with the Mandalorian and the Mythosaur pendant. And what a great story about running into Jon Favreau and just being prepared for that opportunity. You know, my takeaways from Tom are largely that Tom is fearless. Doesn't mean he's not afraid of stuff. It doesn't mean that he doesn't get frustrated by things. It doesn't mean he's perfect. But Tom will venture into something and figure it out. He wants to learn. He wants to do new and cool stuff. And it leads to wonderful opportunities, just like the Jon Favreau Mandalorian opportunity. But beyond that, it has led to opportunities for Tom to earn a living. And he has done that over the years and quite well. And I'm looking forward to seeing what Tom has going on next. I encourage you to visit Tom's Etsy shop and to visit his website and reach out to him. I'll have his contact information in the show notes. I have a brief addendum to today's episode. Tom had asked me if he could thank a few people in regard to his career, and I thought it was important to share. So here we go.
Hi, John. Thanks for letting me put this little postscript to our interview. It had occurred to me, and forgive me for moving around. I'm trying to get the glare off my glasses, and my dog is also saying hello. That during our talk, I had really forgotten to mention something fairly important and very important. And it's something I didn't realize until way after it happened. But to give you a little background, so my dad worked for Illinois Bell Telephone in kind of accounting payroll. My mom was a first grade teacher. So my brother, older than me by 2.5 years, became an electrical engineer. I was in fine arts, so polar opposites almost. And when he was getting ready to go to college, my folks sat us both down and said, we don't know how to help you in your chosen field, but we will back you whatever you want to do, no matter what. Now, at the time, it didn't really register. But it wasn't until, I was probably out on my own and, working for myself that it really hit home and it became apparent to me how important that was. Especially when I had, friends and coworkers whose parents did not support them in what they were choosing to do, whether it was fine arts or accounting or whatever. But it made me realize that anything I've done or have been able to do has been because I had my parents, blessing and backing, and how big of a deal that was. I mean, it was probably not apparent to me because I didn't have to worry about it. It just was. And the fact that they had my back and let me do my own thing without having to worry about it was just so important. And it's let me do what I do, and I cannot stress how big of a deal that was. But just wanted to get that added in as a little postscript. And thank you, Mom and Dad, and thank you, Jon.
Thank you, Tom, for sharing that. I know your parents are proud of you, and I've been really blessed to have met them in my life, and they're really wonderful people. And thanks for showing us the way to be thankful for those who really pour into us. And maybe as a sidebar to those of us out there, if you have parents who've been wonderful, you might want to take a moment to reach out to them and thank them for all they've done for you. And some of us have a different story. Some of us have a story where maybe our parents weren't really present or worse. And I'm sorry for that. I'm sorry that you've gone through that. Nobody deserves that. And I would encourage you to reach out to the people in your life who have been supportive to you. Maybe it's a different family member. Maybe it's a teacher. Maybe it's a mentor. But I bet you've had somebody pour into your life if you think about it. And if you haven't, I encourage you to go look for somebody that is for you, and somebody who may be able to help you find a way that you didn't know was out there, because it is out there. All right. Have a great one.